There is rapid escalating legal back and forth between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. Blake Lively, first, she filed a complaint with the California Commission on Human Rights. That's now become a federal lawsuit filed in New York. Justin Baldoni now suing the New York Times. Different cases, different legal theories, but both overlap with shocking allegations made against each other. Blake Lively's lawsuit is based on allegations of sexual harassment and retaliation, which she said occurred during filming of the movie It Ends With Us. She alleges that when they were filming, Blake Lively experienced inappropriate conduct in the workplace and that she raised these complaints, not just with Justin Baldoni, but with the production company, the distributor, and others involved in the production. She says after she raised those complaints, there was a planned takedown publicly of her and a smear campaign that was orchestrated by Baldoni and his PR team. She says all of that was in retaliation for her raising valid, protected complaints regarding misconduct in the workplace. Justin Baldoni has a completely separate case, although many of the facts overlap. Baldoni is suing the New York Times for libel. The legal theory that he's raising is that the New York Times published Blake Lively's complaint and issues that Blake Lively raised in a submission to the California Division of Human Rights. He says that everything was printed in the New York Times was mischaracterized, was put in a false light to be supportive of Blake, but did not tell his side of the story. The nature of the complaint and the nature of the legal theory is libel, meaning that false allegations were printed against him, and he seeks to hold the New York Times liable to the tune of $250 million. I was not surprised to see Justin Baldoni get his arguments out there in the public sphere because there was such backlash after Blake Lively filed her complaint against him. What was surprising is the avenue that he took to do so. It's all playing out in legal filings. And so where a complaint would normally just say the basics of what needs to be asserted in order for a claim to go forward in court, this complaint against the New York Times has an incredible amount of detail. It has pictures of text messages, and those text messages speak more to his defense to Blake Lively's allegations than it does in furtherance of the defamation lawsuit. So all of this was expected. We knew Justin Baldoni and his legal team promised to push back on Blake Lively's allegations. But the fact that it comes in the venue of a libel case against the New York Times was surprising. So why file this suit against the New York Times before filing a counterclaim against Blake Lively? The answer is, why wait? At this point, there are other individuals who are plaintiffs in that suit. 10 people are bringing this case against the New York Times. He obviously is going to be a part of that case. And quite frankly, if he were to not be a part of it and he were to omit himself as one of the plaintiffs, that would speak volumes. And this is an avenue for him to get his side of the story out and also challenge the reporting of the New York Times. According to his complaint, he says the New York Times had other text messages and other information in their possession, but did not report it. Instead, only focused on what was in furtherance of Blake Lively's allegations. So it's a valid complaint. His absence from this libel suit would actually speak more than his participation in it. And when you're talking about litigating on multiple fronts and this type of litigation where there's different issues, but it's all based on the same set of facts, namely the production and what happened during the filming of It Ends With Us and the publicity tour that happened afterwards. So it's all the same set of facts, but it's litigating in multiple venues under multiple different legal theories. And the reality is, this is proactive, Baldoni bringing a lawsuit against the New York Times, rather than reactive, meaning asserting claims in response to Blake Lively's allegations. So not surprising that he took this path, especially since there's other plaintiffs. There's also considerations to be had when filing a counterclaim in a sexual harassment and retaliation lawsuit like this one. In fact, a defendant can actually add a whole new legal theory and a whole new set of allegations against them by raising counterclaims. The plaintiff, in this case, Lively, could say that his counterclaim in total is actually another retaliatory act, meaning she's complaining about the work environment. She's complaining about sexual harassment. She's complaining about retaliatory acts, and he doubles down and has another act of retaliation by filing a counterclaim. So there's a lot of analysis from the legal perspective as to whether or not it's worth it to move forward in that space. The filing against the New York Times actually lays out and forecasts a lot of what we can expect to see as his defenses he intends to raise to Blake Lively's lawsuit. First, he put a whole host of text messages in that complaint. And we know some of those text messages that were referenced, he wasn't involved in. It was just the PR company. It was just the PR representatives. So we can expect Baldoni to raise a defense on the basis that his PR team was taking action and he wasn't necessarily on board with their plan. A second defense that it's clear he's going to raise is that the conduct Blake Lively alleges in the complaint is not true, that he's contesting it. He's denying all of those allegations. And third, the overarching aspect that he appears to be raising based on his complaint against the New York Times is that Blake Lively actually fabricated these allegations of sexual harassment for the purpose of taking over the production of It Ends With Us. All of that is going to be a part of his defense based on what we see playing out in these legal filings. Now, that's a tough case because Blake Lively, in her complaint, she says that there was an all hands on deck meeting where she raised all of these issues of inappropriate conduct in the workplace. This meeting was not just her and Justin Baldoni. This meeting involved other individuals relating to the work environment and individuals who were going to put protections in place for conduct moving forward. Now, that allegedly, according to Blake Lively's complaint, resulted in a list of changes that needed to be made before production begins. The reason that that's so relevant is that whether or not those allegations were actually refuted or denied, there is a documented instance where Blake Lively raised problems relating to sexual harassment. Once she raises these allegations of sexual harassment, they are documented inappropriate conduct in the workplace. The case is teed up for a retaliation case. And that means later, at some point in time during the production and after, there are retaliatory acts taken against her because she complained about protected issues in the workplace. So that timing, the timing between raising the allegations and the timing between the PR smear campaign, as she alleges in her complaint, really keeps this case alive and makes it a much more difficult case for Baldoni to ultimately succeed. Her legal claim is that she raised allegations against Baldoni regarding inappropriate conduct in the workplace and that he retaliated by this widespread smear campaign in conjunction with his PR crisis management team. His response to that is that Blake Lively actually had a diabolical plan to take over the production of It Ends With Us and raised false allegations dating back months and months and months before PR for the movie even began. That's going to be a tough sell to a jury, to think that something would be put into motion so far in advance for the purpose of really upsetting a business transaction. It's just not credible and it's unlikely to succeed. Remember that the press tour for It Ends With Us was huge. There were so many interviews, so many public appearances where both Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni were talking about each other, the movie, the book, all of it. All of that is going to be fair game at trial. Every comment that was made in the public sphere can ultimately come into the courtroom, would point specifically to Baldoni's comments about Blake Lively about working on the film and what she thought of her experience. All of those interviews, all of those questions, all of those responses those are going to come into the trial, and they will be evidence relating to the claims asserted. If there's any evidence that actually corroborates Blake Lively's allegations that were raised at that all hands on deck meeting, meaning pictures being shown on the set, talk about pornography or other sexual acts, if anything corroborates that, it's going to be very, very difficult for Baldoni to get out of this case on motion practice or at the early stages of litigation. It's the type of case that will only be resolved at trial. What's interesting is now we have two different cases filed under two different legal theories, working their way through two different courts. So we may find out more information publicly about how these cases play out, even if the litigations are moving at different speeds. With respect to both cases, they've just been filed. They're at the very, very beginning of the case. The next steps in both: discovery, depositions, exchange of documents and information between the parties, motion practice, which we publicly filed and will give us more insight to the nature of the claims and the evidence that's out there to support either one's version of the facts. These cases can take years to work their way through the courtroom. But when you have the he said, she said, and the type of allegations that are in Blake Lively's complaint, they do not typically resolve at the early stages. You usually see those cases go to trial. The New York Times case will have a lot of legal challenges right at the outset because it is an incredibly high standard to sue a news publication for libel, especially when the plaintiff is a public figure. So with respect to Baldoni's case, he would be required to prove what's called actual malice, meaning the Times knew what they were reporting was false, or they had information that what they were reporting was false, but they did it anyway. In this case, the defense is what's called substantial truth. Most of the New York Times article was based on Blake Lively's filing. In fact, Justin Baldoni's own allegations say that a lot of the article was pulled directly from her complaint. The New York Times is going to have cover and shield under those circumstances because they'll say, we were just reporting what was in a filing. We did not say whether or not it's true or false. We were reporting the nature of the allegations. So that's the type of case that gets challenged right at the outset. And many libel cases, especially when it comes to celebrities, actually get dismissed before they even make it into the courtroom. Blake Lively is seeking damages for emotional distress, lost wages, as well as punitive damages. All of those damages are recoverable under the legal theory that Blake Lively is advancing in court, but they're different and they require different proof in order to be successful and ultimately recover. The emotional distress damages, those relate to the distress, mental anguish, anxiety, depression that is directly the result of the conduct that is alleged in the complaint. So usually what you'll see is medical records, you'll see therapy notes, you'll see other medically corroborative evidence that links what happened at the workplace to the emotional distress damages that are sought. Lost wages is another bucket of damages. She said she lost income because the smear campaign actually directly impacted her businesses. Now, that's going to be a tricky argument because the lost wages component, a defense will say, can only be related to money that she earned or did not earn for making the movie itself. All of her other side businesses are not relevant. She's going to argue that they're directly related and linked to the courtroom. That's also going to be experts who will testify about the impact of the negative publicity on her businesses. Now, the last is punitive damages. Punitive damages are exactly what they sound like, punishment damages. They can only be recovered in instances which shock the conscience. So the conduct has to be so severe and so bad that it would actually shock the conscience of a reasonable person. This is going to be the argument Blake Lively will make with respect to punitive damages, that because she raised those allegations of sexual harassment, he wanted to suppress her voice. And so he moved forward with this publicity campaign that was negative to her. That's how she will try and establish the very, very, very high standard for punitive damages. Baldoni brings up Ryan Reynolds in a new context in his most recent filing, saying that Reynolds actually berated him for some of his alleged conduct on the set. Now, Ryan, at this point, does not face any specific allegations, or there's no legal claims that are asserted against him. There could be issues with respect to contractual arrangements, who was supposed to do what with respect to the production. That would all be largely contract. And we haven't seen those yet, so they're unlikely to happen at this point. That being said, Ryan is going to have a large part in this case, and that's because he had involvement with the production of the movie. We know he was a participant in that all hands on deck meeting that serves as the basis for Blake Lively's lawsuit. So he's going to be deposed. He's going to be turning over text messages, emails, documents, information, subpoenas. So he'll be largely involved in the case. The question is, where will it stand with marital and spousal privilege? So he can't be compelled to testify against Blake Lively. She can't be compelled to testify against him. They'll both be called as witnesses in these civil cases. But sometimes there are issues which go outside the spousal relationship. And a judge can say that an individual is required to testify about communications with their spouse. I would expect Baldoni and his team to raise this argument and to say there are communications that are about what they're having for dinner. There are communications about who's picking up the kids. But then there were communications about the production of the movie and how they wanted to proceed strategically with respect to marketing or any other aspect of the film. Those, Baldoni will argue, fall outside of spousal privilege, and they directly relate to the heart of the matter. So the big fight for Ryan Reynolds, not taking the stand against Blake Lively's interest. At the end of the day, the big question, are any of these really about the money? Or are the legal filings an avenue to get the narrative out of the respective players in this situation? Blake Lively is able to tell her story through a federal complaint. Baldoni tells his story through the libel action against the New York Times. The question is, are these cases more about public relations and framing of these individuals in a more positive light than actually recovering damages at the end of the day? We're going into award season. There's going to be red carpet interviews. There's going to be a lot of eyes on both of these cases and on all of these actors. When it comes to legal advice as to how to respond to questions about active litigation, lawyers generally say less is more. There's a plan of action for each individual as to how to respond to these questions as they inevitably come up in interviews, on the red carpet, or in other media appearances. But the advice is generally the same. Say nothing, say you can't comment, and let the case play out in a court of law. Interestingly enough, the timing of these filings is at the precipice of award season. Is there a reason that we see these filings coming into the public sphere at this point in time, as the award season is about to be as the award season is about to unfold? It could be that both sides are getting their narratives out before the award season happens so that they don't really have to say anything individually. They can let the documents do the talking. There's a lot of talk now about the PR machine. And some of what we're seeing in these cases is a look into how crisis management and public relations actually goes down. But the reality is, it's not illegal to try and spin a story or to shape a narrative to the benefit or negatively to another person. But it really crosses the line from a legal perspective when that information, that PR machine, is used to silence victims, intimidate accusers, or to retaliate against complaints in the workplace. All of these allegations regarding the set and the work environment of It Ends With Us are really, really salacious. Again, they've been denied, so we don't know what's true or false. But as they stand, a lot of people think that because it's a movie set, it's a bit more loose. People have different relationships. People talk more about their personal lives or about other content that might be out there in the public sphere. But keep in mind, it is a workplace. And so if it wouldn't be appropriate in a corporate environment, sitting in your cubicle, sitting in your office, it's not appropriate on a movie set. And that's the principle behind the law. It's a sexual harassment workplace issue. And those are the allegations Blake Lively is raising.